Hi, in today's Psych Review, we're going to talk about the book Going Infinite. And this is by Michael Lewis. There we go, so you can see it. Okay? And it's about Sam Bankman-Fried and FTX. And I found it very, very interesting. Now, I'm not going to give any spoilers in this, but let's talk about how the book portrays SBF, Sam Bankman-Fried, as he is portrayed in the book. Now, interestingly, when I started reading it, the way he is described, it seems very much like an individual who's along the autistic spectrum disorder spectrum. And it's interesting because he overly focuses on mathematical properties of people. He's using this sort of formula, this equation, to understand others, how to maneuver, so to speak, through social interactions, various situations that he gets in. And interestingly, he finds a field that was pretty new, which is cryptocurrency. He goes through some other experiences as well that they talk about, but he finds cryptocurrencies. And this is a fit because there is a degree of uncertainty, and this uncertainty breeds further uncertainty. So it adds this level of variability. Now, if we look at it from presumably SBF's perspective, needing that mathematical property, that variable, a continuous random variable, and this individual always tries to get a mathematical understanding of what's going on, how the world works. So cryptocurrency, because there's so much variability, that he kind of falls into it. He fits into it because he feels like he needs to solve the mathematical component of cryptocurrency. And it's very interesting. And what happens in the book, what you see is, again, that he feels like he's very much on the fringe, right? That he's on the outskirts of a lot of these social interactions. And he relies on these probabilities to manage other individuals and tries to determine outcomes of relationships. And it's interesting because I think the way that he sees himself is certainly as a more consistent variable in a world of random variables. And I think that certainly works for him within a field of continuous random variables, much like cryptocurrency. Now, at one point, there is a psychiatrist who's helping different individuals, and what happens is the way that the psychiatrist works with him is that it becomes more cognitive process than an emotional process. And the cost and benefit analysis to sacrifice and choice. Because I think, as a psychologist, working with someone, we always have to try to incorporate their framework into the treatment. And I think that the psychiatrist in the book is certainly trying to do that. He's trying to relate to him in a way that he can understand, which again is that cost-benefit analysis, that equation. And the psychiatrist is trying to gain an emotional perspective and understand different interactions for an emotional perspective, although it is external, meaning that SBF has difficulty sort of internalizing these emotional processes. And we don't want to say that it's really a deficit, but it's certainly a degree of distortion about how emotions, which emotions for a lot of us are this continual random variable. And for SBF throughout the book, it really is that these emotions are continuous random variables. And because if you have more consistent variables, you focus more on the consistent variables than the random ones to try to develop an outcome. And I think that that's the equation, that's the formula that I pick up as we're going through the book. And Michael Lewis is an amazing writer, so he describes things really, really well. I've read a number of his other books, highly recommend them. And it's very interesting. And also, to go back to the book, that they talk about lists about connections to this person, Caroline. And Caroline is somebody that she has a romantic interest in SBF. They hook up here or there. They have a relationship, but it's an ill-defined relationship. So she's very confused by it, and she describes the relationship and its consequences in terms of the consequence it has, though, and this might be strange, so stick with me, as these lists that she creates appear to have some emotional consideration, although they're surface. So in other words, what Caroline does is she's trying to apply a very cost-benefit analysis to the relationship, what she can get out of it. She understands that to connect with SBF, you need to do that in a particular way. So a lot of her emails, memos to him are really bullet points because she knows that if you put him in paragraph form, he's not going to read it. So she puts it in a way that he can understand. She adapts, much like the psychiatrist did, adapts to his degree of understanding. And in doing that, she's trying to understand their relationship, how she can connect to him. Because she does initially want to have a more consistent relationship with him. However, the cost-benefit analysis isn't working out. But when emotions, that continuous random variable for all of us, comes into play, she very much sort of feels that distortion. And she feels, according to the book, a greater sense of detachment, although she wants to be close. Meaning, her emotions are driving her to be closer to SBF, but cognitively and the cost-benefit analysis, the mathematics, say that it's just not going to work. So, sometimes what you do in statistics is if it's not working with one particular statistical approach, sometimes you have to find another statistical approach in order to reach your desired outcome. So I think we see that Caroline does that. And there are so many reports related to calculations of demise with some thoughts about helping others. But mostly fear is balanced by numerical property and potential outcome. When cryptocurrency comes into play, when FTX is in play and it's working, and Alameda Research, which is a big component as well. And again, I don't want to give any spoilers. So we see that certainly from Caroline's perspective, but others' perspective, that these calculations, how can you calculate the demise or success of a particular business that's based on cryptocurrency that has many random variables? So there's no applied structure relatively to cryptocurrency. It depends on how much you know and how much you understand. We're not going to get deep into cryptocurrency in this video. So there's one particular point in the book that I want to read, and it's on page 112, and it's not going to have any spoilers, but I think that it really does conceptualize a lot of the book. When I read it, I was like, oh yeah, this really applies the feel for the book. So I'm going to read to you from the book. How did everyone's actions reflect on the probability distribution of their future behavior? The sentence told you a lot about how Sam viewed other people and maybe himself too. Not as fixed characters, good or bad, honest or false, brave or cowardly, but as a probability distribution around some mean. And I think that really says a lot. How he construed other people, how he construed relationships, certainly how we just, talked about him as well. But people, I think, that had the greatest success with him understood his approach. By approach, I mean his perception of others, about his perception of relationships and connecting to others. Now, certainly, as FTX goes along, Alameda Research, the company starts to crumble, and everybody scatters. Now, no money in pretty surface-oriented relationships tends to equal no friends. And that is an ageless story of false loyalty. While the party's going on, everybody loves you, but no one is there for the cleanup. You know what I'm saying? So as money's flying, billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars going in all these different directions, given to celebrities, given to different causes, so on and so forth. Everybody's there for the fun, for the party. But once things start to crumble, once the foundation begins to have cracks and those cracks continue to grow, all of a sudden people bail. And confusion kind of sets in for SBF at this time. He declares bankruptcy. He reportedly signs the bankruptcy papers. Then, a short time later, tries to undo it. But of course, this isn't permitted. You can't really do that. And it's fascinating because he's a very bright guy, but this goes to that calculation, that need for calculation, is that perhaps he weighted his own sense of self, his own variable, above other variables, meaning that you sign this bankruptcy paper, then he wants to take it back, and he's like, well, no, I didn't mean it. Legal paperwork doesn't work that way. So, of course, they said, yeah, that isn't going to work. Because you have a wildcatter who comes in and in a sort of compared looking at the financials and the money trail in tantamount to an Easter egg hunt. There's so much money in different locations. There's so much just different facets of FTX. So what happens is during the Easter egg hunt, you see that no one is sure how many eggs have been hidden, right? So it's, Easter Sunday, you're out looking for all those eggs. Sometimes you find a bunch of eggs here, sometimes you find none. But if you don't know how many total eggs there are, you get lost and you don't know what you're looking for. When do you stop looking? And that's sort of what the wildcatter is trying to figure out. And you have SBF, who's not really assisting in this process really at all. And he's trying to apply structure to a liquid that is falling in all directions. So it's like a fountain, right? But the fountain is in all directions, and you have one single cup, and you're trying to catch all the water with your one cup. Well, you can't, because it's in all these different directions, and you have one red solo cup. There you go. Right? So you really can't do that, but some people think that you can, and that's sort of the exercise that you see play out as they're learning more about FTX, as they're building more of a case into the business, and they're looking for fraud and other types of factors. So the question really sort of rose to me as I was reading it, is this disorganized brilliance or purposeful deceit and theft? And that's one of those questions that as you're reading it, I think, again, because Michael Lewis is such a good writer, that you kind of get that feel like, well, which way does it go? And like all good books, the reader is left to decide that. So Michael Lewis doesn't hold your hand through it and say, this is what it is. You sort of have to make your own opinion. And that's what great books are all about. But through the course of managing FTX, SBF had devised methods to control his employees using a cryptocurrency called Serum, for example. So this is an interesting application about, and people are the absolute random variable, but knowing that SPF looks at individuals in a very mathematical cost-benefit analysis way, he tries to limit the degree of variability by devising methods of control. And he creates this cryptocurrency called Serum. And he'd give them Serum tokens, then say that they can cash them in 1/7 of a time for 7 years. However, SBF would change the terms, leaving the holders sort of uncertain in the new conditions. So you're constantly changing those conditions. So you're constantly, basically, it's like dangling a carrot without ever seeing the carrot, but you believe it's there, so you keep racing and chasing the invisible carrot. You see what I mean? I mean, it applies a structure. There's so many things that happen in our life like that. And SBF, understanding mathematics, understanding probabilities, trying to put human beings, the ultimate random variable, in this context, that he creates this method to limit the variability. It's a very interesting approach. And again, I'm not going to give my opinion of it, but I think that it after a while, like if you do that with people, I think what happens is they get frustrated, they get angry, and then they become detached. Now that could certainly add to what we talked about a moment ago, which is that when the party's over, everybody's out. So if they're making money, they're okay with the invisible carrot. But if they're not, and they're really hungry for that carrot, they're like, well, I'm sick of chasing it, I'm out. Maybe you've had a relationship like that. So let's talk about what happened to SBF. So here's a possible spoiler. So possible spoiler alert. Okay. So on November 2nd, a New York jury found SBF guilty on all 7 counts he was charged with by the Department of Justice. Now this included defrauding customers and investors of his crypto exchange FTX. Now SBF There's a lot of FTX, SBF, stay with me. But so SBF, the jurors decided, was part of a conspiracy to extract more than $8 billion from FTX customers and funnel it to his trading firm, Alameda Research, which he spent it on a Bahamian research estate. Now, this startup investments and political donations. So he spread this money around. But, of course, what the jury said is that he was guilty of fraud and he was charged. And lastly, SBF is scheduled for sentencing on March 28th, 2024. And it will be decided by the trial court judge. I really encourage you to check out Going Infinite. It's really good. It's a very interesting read. Michael Lewis is an amazing writer. So I hope you enjoyed this psych review, and I'll see you next time.